The sky was gray that morning, the kind of color that makes everything feel heavier than it is. The village was unusually silent, except for the murmuring crowd gathered near the old church. I stood at the far end, half hidden behind a tall mango tree, watching the men in black carry the coffin of Chief Kamau, my grandfather. To everyone else, he was a respected leader, a man of power, wealth, and countless stories. To me, he was a mystery, a name whispered by my grandmother when she thought I was asleep. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't even supposed to exist in their world, but something deep inside told me I had to come. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fate, pulling me toward the truth I'd been denied all my life. I could feel eyes on me, suspicious, judgmental, curious. I didn't care. I'd walked miles, wearing my best secondhand shirt, just to stand here and see the man whose blood ran in my veins but whose hands never held me. As the priest began the sermon, I noticed the front row, my so-called family, my uncles and aunts, dressed in expensive black lace, weeping loudly for the cameras, their faces painted with grief that looked rehearsed. I remembered their faces from the stories, the same people who threw my mother out when she was pregnant with me. They called her a disgrace, they said I was a mistake. And now, there they were, pretending to mourn the man who had quietly kept his guilt hidden behind his wealth. Just as the casket was being lowered, a man in a navy suit approached me. He looked out of place, like he didn't belong in the dust and sorrow of the village. He stopped beside me and spoke softly. "Are you Adisa?" The sound of my name on his tongue froze me. "Yes," I replied, unsure. He looked around before handing me a sealed envelope. "Your presence is required at the reading of the will," he said. "Chief Kamau left specific instructions. Be there at noon." Before I could say anything, he walked away, leaving the scent of cologne and confusion behind. I stared at the envelope in my hand, white, clean, and heavy, like it carried the weight of my entire past. I didn't understand. Why would the man who never claimed me leave anything for me? My heart pounded with mixed emotions, anger, fear, and something like hope. The crowd was dispersing, and I could feel some eyes still watching me. I slipped the envelope into my pocket and turned to leave, but not before glancing at the grave one last time. "Why now?" I whispered. "After all these years, why now?" The wind blew softly, carrying dust and dry leaves across the fresh grave. Somewhere in that silence, I felt like the answer was waiting, buried deep, waiting to rise. I was 4 months old when they left me. That's what my grandmother told me years later, though her voice always trembled when she said it. She said it was a night wrapped in thunder and shame. My mother crying outside the compound gates, clutching me tight against her chest while my father's family shouted from inside. They called her cursed, unworthy, a stain on their proud lineage. My father didn't even come out. He just watched from behind the window, too weak to stand up for the woman who loved him, or the child that carried his blood. When the guards dragged her out, she screamed my name, Adisa, the one she had chosen herself. In our language, it means one who is clear. But nothing was ever clear about my beginning. They said my mother collapsed by the river that night. An old midwife found her at dawn, half dead, and me, wrapped in a torn blanket, crying like the world had already betrayed me. My mother never woke up again. The midwife, Mama Nuru, became my world. She was poor, living in a clay house that smelled of smoke and herbs. But she gave me everything she could, her love, her patience, and her stories. She never spoke ill of my father's family, though I could see the bitterness in her eyes when people whispered about the child from the chief's bloodline who grew up in the mud. Growing up, I learned quickly that silence was safer than truth. Kids mocked me in school for not knowing my real family. Some called me a bastard. Others said I was cursed. I didn't fight back, not because I was weak, but because I learned that anger wastes the little energy you need to survive. I worked odd jobs, carrying firewood, selling fruits, cleaning. I promised myself one thing: I would never need them. But destiny, it seems, enjoys irony. Years later, when I turned 18, a man in town offered me work at a mechanic's shop. He said an anonymous sponsor had paid for my training. I never knew who it was, but sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a black car parked nearby, the kind that didn't belong in our dusty streets. I'd see the reflection of an old man in the back seat, dignified, silent, and watching me. I didn't know it then, but it was him, Chief Como, my grandfather. Maybe guilt had finally found him. Maybe he wanted to make peace before death came knocking. And now, years later, standing at his funeral, holding an envelope with my name on it, I wondered, was this his final act of redemption? Or just another chapter in a curse that began the night I was abandoned? The truth was coming for me, and I could already feel its shadow. For years, I thought my grandfather hated me, or worse, that he never even knew I existed. But life has a strange way of revealing secrets at the right time. When I finally opened the envelope the lawyer had given me, I found a letter written in shaky handwriting, the ink slightly smudged as if the writer's hands had trembled. To my grandson, Adisa, it began. If you are reading this, I am gone. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I pray you will at least know the truth before others twist it. My heart stopped. I sat under the same mango tree where I'd watched his coffin disappear into the earth, the paper trembling between my fingers. His words didn't sound like a chief's. They sounded like a man crushed by regret. He confessed that he had known about me all along. My mother had written to him before she died, begging him to let her raise me under his protection. He never answered. Fear of scandal, pride, and the poisonous whispers of his sons made him turn away. But he couldn't forget. He wrote that he had sent money through a trusted friend, a mechanic named Juma, to help me finish school. I remembered Juma well, the man who hired me and taught me how to fix engines and keep my head down. I had thought he was just kind. Now I realized he was my grandfather's silent apology. The letter continued. Every time I saw you from afar, I wanted to come to you. But shame is a heavy chain. I failed your mother, and I failed you. This will, my final will, is the only way I know to make things right. You are my blood, Adisa. You are my heir. I folded the letter, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to tear it apart. Where was he when my stomach growled at night? When I was called names I didn't earn? When I buried Mama Nuru with my bare hands because we couldn't afford a coffin? But another part of me, the part that had spent years wondering why, felt something close to peace. Maybe not forgiveness, but understanding. The man I had hated was also a prisoner of his own cowardice. As I stared at his words, a voice interrupted my thoughts. The same lawyer from the funeral. You should come with me, he said softly. The family will be gathering soon for the reading. It's time you heard what he left behind. I slipped the letter back into the envelope and stood up. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and red colors that looked like fire and blood mixed together. Somewhere inside me, I felt a strange calm. Whatever awaited me, I knew one thing for sure. The past was not done with me yet. By noon, I was standing in the largest house I'd ever seen, my grandfather's mansion. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors, the chandeliers sparkled, and the air smelled of money and pride. Everywhere I looked, I saw portraits of people who had erased me from their history. My uncles sat in a circle, dressed in black agbadas, whispering among themselves. My aunts adjusted their veils dramatically, pretending to be devastated. None of them recognized me. To them, I was just some stranger the lawyer had dragged in. The lawyer, Mr. Daniels, cleared his throat. As per Chief Kamau's will, we are gathered to distribute his estate and assets. Please, everyone remain calm. The murmurs stopped. You could feel the greed floating in the room like smoke. He began reading. Each relative got something: land, houses, cars, a little piece of the empire my grandfather had built. There were smiles, nods, and fake tears. But then Mr. Daniels paused. The silence was sharp enough to cut through air. Lastly, he said, Chief Como leaves his remaining assets, including the main estate, the commercial property in the city, and his total savings valued at approximately $3.4 million. To his grandson, Adisa. The room froze. For a moment, all I heard was the ticking of the golden wall clock. Then, chaos. Who is Adisa? One of my uncles shouted, slamming his palm on the table. What grandson? Another voice, trembling with disbelief, hissed, that boy from the slums. Their eyes found me, finally realizing who I was. The silence that followed was heavy, full of recognition and resentment. I met their gaze without flinching. Mr. Daniels continued. Chief Kamau stated clearly that Adisa is the legitimate heir to his name and estate. All legal documents are signed and notarized. Impossible. My aunt screamed. He was manipulated. Someone tricked him. An older uncle, the one who had always acted like the new head of the family, stood and pointed at me. This is witchcraft. That bastard doesn't belong here. His words didn't hurt. Not anymore. I had heard worse as a child, but this time, I wasn't powerless. I looked at him, calm and steady. The chief seemed to think otherwise. I said quietly. The lawyer asked everyone to calm down, but the shouting grew louder. Some accused the lawyer of forgery. Others demanded a DNA test. The scene was chaos wrapped in expensive perfume. When it was finally over, I stepped outside. The afternoon sun burned my face, but I didn't care. I walked to the edge of the compound, where the village could still be seen beyond the iron gates. For the first time, I felt the weight of destiny, not as a curse, but as a weapon. Inside that house, they were fighting over numbers. Outside, I stood with something they'd never have again: truth. Days after the will reading, the entire village buzzed with gossip. Everyone had a story to tell: how the chief's forgotten grandson had returned from nowhere, how the rich family had been shamed, how blood had turned into battle. Wherever I went, people stared. Some smiled out of pity, others out of fear. They knew this wasn't going to end quietly. It didn't take long before the family came knocking. Literally, one evening, just as I was about to close my small shop, a shiny black SUV pulled up. Out stepped my uncle, the same one who had called me a bastard during the will reading. His tone had changed completely now. He smiled like a snake wearing perfume. "Adisa, my boy," he said loudly, as if the entire street needed to hear his new kindness. "You've grown into a fine young man. We need to talk." I didn't reply. I just motioned toward a chair. He sat, crossed his legs, and started talking about family bonds, about misunderstandings of the past. He said they wanted to make peace, but I could see the desperation behind his smile. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You see, this inheritance, it's complicated. The money, the businesses. You're too young to handle it all. Let us help you manage it. We'll make sure you're comfortable." I laughed softly. "You mean you'll take it back?" His smile faltered. "Watch your tone. Boy, we're trying to help you." "Help," I said, my voice steady. Where was that help when I was hungry? When I buried my grandmother alone? When I fixed cars just to eat? He didn't answer. His face hardened. "You think this is over? You think you can steal what belongs to us?" "I didn't steal anything," I replied. "I inherited what was mine all along." He stood up abruptly, knocking the chair over. "You'll regret this insolence," he spat, before storming off. That night, I barely slept. I could feel something dark building, like a storm that refused to pass. The next morning, I found a letter pinned to my shop door, a court summons. They were suing me. The claim was simple. They accused me of forging the will, of manipulating the lawyer, of pretending to be Chief Kama's grandson. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper, my hands trembling not from fear but anger. They had abandoned me, erased me, cursed me, and now, when fate finally gave me justice, they were coming to take it back. But I wasn't that helpless child anymore. I folded the paper and whispered to myself, if it's war they want, then war they will have. The next battle wouldn't be fought in silence. It would be fought in court, and this time, I had the truth on my side. The courtroom smelled of dust, old paper, and arrogance. My uncles arrived first, dressed in expensive suits, their faces painted with confidence. They thought money would buy them truth. I came alone, wearing a simple shirt, clutching my grandfather's letter in my pocket, my only weapon. The whispers began as soon as I entered. Some pitied me, others mocked me. To them, I was just the poor boy who dared to challenge royalty. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the court to order. The case was titled Kamau Family vs. Adisa. Kamau. The words looked surreal on the file. My name, finally standing next to theirs. Their lawyer began with venom. He claimed I was a fraud, a con artist who took advantage of an old man's failing mind. The defendant fabricated a will, he declared, to steal from his rightful family. I sat quietly, my hands steady even though my heart was pounding. When my turn came, my lawyer, a humble man named Sefu, who had taken my case out of principle, rose. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "we have evidence that Chief Kamau not only knew Adisa but supported him secretly for years." He called the first witness Juma, the old mechanic who had once been my mentor. He walked slowly to the stand, his cap in his hands. "Yes, I knew Adisa," he said. "And yes, Chief Kamau paid me every month to look after him," he said. "One day, the boy will know who he is." Gasps echoed in the room. My uncles exchanged uneasy glances. Then came the documents, letters, signed checks, even voice recordings from my grandfather's caretaker. His voice cracked through the speakers, saying, "My biggest sin was abandoning my blood. I hope Adisa forgives me." The lawyer for my uncles tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a glance. "Let him finish," she said. By the third day, the tension had grown unbearable. One of my aunts fainted when she realized how much proof we had. Another broke down crying, begging me outside court to drop the case. "They'll destroy you," she warned. "You don't know how far they'll go." But I did. I had lived in the dark long enough to know what survival felt like. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was clear and final. "This court recognizes Adisa Kamo as the legitimate heir to Chief Kamo's estate. The will stands." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My eyes blurred as the words sank in. Around me, I heard shouting, anger, disbelief, defeat, but through it all, I felt only silence inside. I had won. Yes, but victory felt heavier than I imagined. The courtroom emptied slowly. As I stood there, alone, I realized that truth doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes, it just burns away the lies that kept you warm. The day after the verdict, the world felt strangely quiet. I walked through the same streets where people once called me names. And now they bowed slightly, whispering Chief Adisa as I passed. It should have felt good, but it didn't. Power has a strange taste when it comes from pain. I returned to the mansion. The house that once symbolized everything I hated. The gates opened for me now, but the walls still felt cold. My grandfather's portrait hung in the main hall. His eyes painted so lifelike they seemed to follow me. I stopped and stared at him. "You got your justice," I murmured, "but you left me to fight for it alone." Inside, the family gathered in fragments, defeated, broken, but not humble. My eldest uncle avoided my eyes. One of my cousins glared at me as if I'd stolen his soul. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, my aunt, the only one who had once shown me a little kindness, broke the silence. "We didn't know Adisa," she said softly. "We thought you were gone forever." I smiled sadly. "You didn't look for me." She dropped her eyes. They tried to apologize in their own twisted ways, talking about family mistakes and moving forward. But I could hear the bitterness hiding behind every word. For them, I wasn't a person, I was a wound they wanted to close quickly. Later that evening, I found myself standing near my grandfather's grave. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of rain. I placed my hand on the tombstone, feeling its cold surface under my palm. "You wanted me to forgive them," I said quietly, "but you never asked if I could." The memories returned, my mother's cries, the hunger, the shame, the loneliness. For years, I dreamed of being seen, being recognized. Now that I had it, I realized recognition wasn't peace. It was just another kind of burden. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, and in that moment, I thought I heard my grandmother's voice. "Let go, child. You've already won." I closed my eyes. Maybe she was right. Maybe victory wasn't about punishing them. It was about freeing myself from their shadow. I whispered a quiet prayer, not for them, but for me. For the boy who survived abandonment and grew into the man they could no longer ignore. As I turned to leave, I glanced back one last time. "You left me with nothing," I said, but somehow, that nothing became everything. The rain began to fall, washing away the dust from the grave, the bitterness from my heart, and maybe, just maybe, the last trace of the past that had haunted me for too long. Weeks passed after the storm settled. The lawyers finished their work. The court files were closed, and the money was transferred into accounts I never dreamed I'd have. But even with all the numbers printed neatly on papers, I didn't feel rich. I felt empty. Maybe that's what happens when your victory comes from pain. I sat on the balcony of the mansion one evening, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. The same fields where I once walked barefoot now stretched before me like a painting. The same sky that once watched me cry in hunger now painted itself in gold. Everything had changed, and yet something deep inside me hadn't. The villagers started calling me Chief Adisa. Some came to greet me, others came to beg for favors. They said I was blessed, but I didn't feel like a blessing. I still remembered the nights I had slept on an empty stomach, the laughter of children who mocked me, the kind voice of Mama Nuru telling me not to let bitterness eat my soul. One afternoon, I visited her grave. The wind whispered through the grass, and I placed a white flower on the soil. "You were right, Mama," I said softly. "The world turns, and truth always finds its way." I smiled faintly, but it doesn't heal everything. As I turned to leave, a car stopped nearby. It was my aunt, the only one who ever showed me a glimpse of kindness. She stepped out, her eyes softer now. "Adisa," she said quietly, "I know we can't undo what happened, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. "I forgave you all a long time ago," I said. "Not for you, for me." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and drove away. I watched the dust trail fade into the distance. For the first time in years, I felt light, as if the chains of my past had finally cracked. That night, I opened my grandfather's letter again. The last line still burned in my mind. "If blood is destiny, then truth is freedom. Live freely, my grandson." I folded it carefully and placed it inside my mother's old locket, the only thing I had left of her. I wore it around my neck, feeling its weight like a promise. Looking out into the quiet night, I whispered, "They abandoned me when I had nothing, but destiny never did." The moonlight touched the mansion walls, the wind sighed through the trees, and I knew this was not revenge anymore. It was closure. Money fades, names are forgotten, but stories live forever. And mine, born from pain, would remind every soul that no rejection is strong enough to stop what fate has already chosen.